Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I am wondering what happened to waterbeds. I was watching this movie and I was like, yeah, what happened to those, right? I feel like my parents, okay, this might not be a real memory. I seem to recall going to visit a family friend when I was a kid and they had a waterbed. And I was like, wow.
I feel like I knew somebody who either had a waterbed or knew someone who had a waterbed. So this story might actually have happened. You and I are just recreating this memory together here.
I guess. Wow. I like that we've known each other for so long that we're starting to telepathically reconstruct what may be a false memory.
Yeah. And why are we talking about waterbeds?
Because we're doing Edward Scissorhands, bro.
As our Christmas movie, question mark.
Question mark. So again, as I mentioned last week, so what typically happens is that I'll be at home laying face down in a puddle of my own saliva or running around my unfurnished basement or grading papers or whatever it is I'm doing.
Yep.
You will tell me what we're doing next and you'll send me a list of options and I'll just glance at it and whatever my eyes lock onto first, that's what we're doing next.
Right.
So I saw Edward Scissorhands and yeah, I was like, Christmas movie? Question mark. But hey, here we are.
Yeah, and we're doing it. And you've never seen Edward Scissorhands before.
No, I have not actually. So this would have been my first exposure to it.
What's your relationship to Burton?
Mr. Burton? Yeah, wow, that's a tough one. I've enjoyed certain Tim Burton-y things. Okay, let me just say that I feel like if you look at me, I look like someone who would enjoy Tim Burton movies.
Right.
I've often made a very self-deprecating joke that I look like an extra who just wandered off the set of a Tim Burton movie.
And he says that he looks exactly like Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah, kind of. Just, when he turned his scissors onto his hair. But I don't know that I've ever really, I've enjoyed certain Tim Burton movies, like the 1989 Batman. I've enjoyed movies that he's been more tangentially a part of, like The Corpse Bride, Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yep.
But I don't really have strong feelings for Tim Burton. For me, he's more of a vibe or an aesthetic.
Yes.
And
the aesthetic is something that's going to come up, I think, multiple times with this movie.
And as, a retired goth, surprisingly, I don't always vibe with the aesthetic.
So for me personally, I grew up watching a lot of Tim Burton movies. Obviously the Batman movies, if you're a millennial, were a big part of your childhood.
Oh, yeah.
I'd seen Edward Scissorhands multiple times before the age of 10, and I haven't seen it since, so I think we're going to have a lot to talk about there. I've seen Beetlejuice. I've seen probably every single one of Tim Burton's late 80s and all 90s movies. I've seen Mars Attacks multiple times.
Oh, Mars Attacks. I was really surprised when I found out that was a Tim Burton movie.
Yeah, you shouldn't be, but yes. I'll say that Big Fish is probably maybe not quite in my top 100 list, but it's a movie that I really love.
Okay.
And maybe it would make that list. I'm not actually sure at this point because I don't have a full 100 list developed yet.
Certain movies that are considered his classics from his golden age, I haven't really vibed with. I watched Beetlejuice for the first time last summer, and I didn't have a good time.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that Beetlejuice is high up on my Tim Burton list either.
I get that it's a classic and that everyone loves it, and I seem like the kind of guy who would love it, but it just didn't do it for me.
Might be a movie that you had to be there for,
Yeah, kind of. And also, I actually did watch The Nightmare Before Christmas for the first time just a couple years ago, and I was a little just that was it. You guys have hyped this movie up for years, and that's all it was?
I think I probably like that movie more than you do. And
probably.
Surprisingly, I might have a better relationship with Tim Burton than you do, although I will say that I haven't liked a Tim Burton movie since Big Fish, and that was maybe 2001, 2003-ish.
Apparently, he worked on Wednesday, and that's apparently pretty good, but I haven't seen that yet.
I haven't seen it either, in all fairness.
Yeah.
But I was a big Addams Family guy growing up, so...
You were?
Yeah, actually.
Okay.
I've seen the TV shows, I've seen the movies, oh god, I can't remember the actors in those movies. Christina Ricci?
Maybe Christopher Lloyd?
Yeah.
I'm going to fuck this up. Raul Julia played Gomez Adams.
Yes, yeah. Side note, that series and those movies are really good, actually, and I'd like to revisit them sometime. Maybe we'll do them on the podcast at some point because I think that they probably hold up, hopefully, relatively well. They hold, in my memory, I have very high regard for them.
Okay, interesting.
But that's, I guess, here nor there. But I guess on the flip side, like the aesthetic of that is kind of similar to what Tim Burton's whole vibe is.
Yeah, and again, I just want to point out how funny it is that, like, if you looked at Blake and I together, you'd point and you had to identify who's the Tim Burton fan, you would all point your fingers at me.
That's true. That is very true.
And I'd just be like, what? No.
Yeah, and then
just because I'm pale and I wear black, that doesn't automatically mean I'm his biggest fan.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that I'm his biggest fan either. Like, I don't think I've really gelled with his movies in 20 years, but coming back to this one, I came back to Nightmare Before Christmas in the last 5 years as well, and I really, really had a good time with that when I watched it. Surprisingly, like, I guess maybe both of us are surprised here that I'm the one kind of championing Tim Burton on this episode.
I feel like we've had a weird streak lately where, like, we've looked at two masterpieces back to back, and you've had critiques that I've just been like, no, they're great. They're absolutely great. And then now we're doing a Tim Burton movie, and you're like, it's great. And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Shall we talk about Edward Scissorhands?
I suppose we should cut to the chase.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry.
You get 5 more puns.
Okay.
This episode.
I'm using them. So basically, we open to an old woman tucking her granddaughter into bed, and she decides to tell her a bedtime story about why it snows. I just want to say the aesthetic or the visual storytelling of this movie is very interesting because we've got this really uniform suburban town with all these like bright pastel colors, and then we've got this fuck off Gothic cathedral just looming over it, right?
Yes. It's like the contrast between the two is eye-popping.
It is indeed eye-popping. So one day, a woman, a door-to-door makeup salesman, is having a rough day making a sale. So she decides to break and enter into this cathedral to see if anyone there might want some makeup.
Yeah.
And who does she find crouched in the attic but the titular Edward Scissorhands, a pale, scrawny, dark-haired young man with blades for hands. And she quite rightly decides to take her home with him, and hijinks ensues.
Yes.
And that is the plot in a nutshell.
Yeah, and the movie is really interesting because it feels like a lot of movies will have a 3-act structure to it.
Yeah.
And I feel like this one, the first and second act are like almost melded in together.
Structurally, I found this movie a bit not bad, just interesting.
Yeah.
A little unusual.
Yes, it is.
Like, so a big part of this movie, spoiler alert, I guess, is this puppy love romance between Edward and Winona Ryder's character.
Yeah.
But she doesn't even show up for the first 40 minutes of the movie.
Right.
She's out with her friends in like the coolest panel van I've ever seen with like flames around the tires and everything. And by the way, she has the world's shittiest boyfriend.
Yes.
Yeah. We should talk about this more in the deep dive, but structurally this movie is very unusual,
Yes.
let's say.
I very much agree. It was something that I recognized in watching this, but like you said, we'll talk about that more in the spoiler section. Characters and people you may know. So I think the film opens with Pag, played by Diane Weist, and she is not your typical protagonist of a film.
No, not even remotely. She's kind of this well-meaning suburban mom.
Yeah, and she's like this Avon door salesman in the 60s or saleswoman in the 60s. Like, this is not the character that I was expecting us to start this movie off with, but she has a very big heart, and she looks at Edward with a lot of pity and a lot of like, you know, I can help you kind of thing, and she takes him in like a wounded animal.
Yeah, I don't even think it's pity. I think it's just genuine, like, aw shucks Midwestern compassion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, she sees this freak, essentially, and
Right.
she's just like, well, I can't leave him here.
Yeah.
I think there is a line, I forget if it's like her son or her husband or someone's like, no, it's Winona Ryder. She's like, why can't you just like, why do we have to take him in? Like, why can't we like, you know, and she's just like aghast at the notion, right? Like, she is appalled by the idea that someone that she could help someone and then would choose not to.
Yes.
She's a very sweet lady.
She is. She very much is. And she's played extremely well by Diane Weiss. Like, I really wanted to highlight her as an actor because she's not somebody, like, she has a very particular way of speaking and like she looks like very striking, but I couldn't think of like where I've seen her from, and that's because I haven't seen her in a lot of other stuff, although she has been in The Mayor of Kingstown recently. She's actually Miriam McCluskey in that, who's Jeremy Renner's mom in that TV series.
Really?
Yeah.
I feel like her and Jeremy Renner are probably around the same age.
No, she's older. She in this movie. She's
oh
like
yeah,
the same
right.
age as
Okay.
Jenny.
Sorry guys, I've only had one coffee today, and I have a pounding headache because of it.
Oh man! And then she also plays Joanne in Life in Pieces.
I've never heard of that. Is it good?
Yeah, I think it's a fairly popular TV show from the 2010s, so I haven't seen it either. So that's what I mean. I hadn't recognized her in anything else, but I was like, this is a really good performance. I genuinely really, really liked that character, and I was kind of shocked by how much I liked the character just because of how it starts us off as her being a door-to-door saleswoman.
I do want to point out that this is like, it reminded me of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, how she sees this Gothic cathedral and she just barges in. Like, hey, anybody want some makeup? Like,
It's great.
Yeah.
The next person we meet really in full is Edward Scissorhands, played by Johnny Depp. I think one of the strongest performances that he's ever done.
I've always admired Johnny Depp as an actor. Maybe not so much as a person, but like as an actor.
Yeah.
And he crushes this role.
Again, maybe his strongest performance of all time. And you could say that the role of Captain Jack Sparrow is maybe one of the most iconic roles or performances of all time, but I sometimes don't always know how much he's acting and how much he's just kind of like doing his thing.
Freestyling?
Yeah. Whereas this is like, there's so many layers to his performance that I think that, I'm really excited to talk about it in more detail.
Yeah, basically, he's like a kind-hearted simpleton, or like he almost seems like mentally he's struggling with like a disability of some sort, right? I mean, basically the whole idea of Edward is that he's an artificial human who was created by a very charming mad scientist, but who was then abandoned when the mad scientist dies, so he doesn't really know how to exist in the world.
Yeah, I don't think disabled's the right way to put it. Like, I would actually compare it more to like Bella from Poor Things, where it's just like this person who obviously looks like a teenager or young adult,
but is more of a child.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. So, and I'll probably make the comparison of Poor Things when we get into the deep dive a little bit more as well. You mentioned the inventor. I wanted to say Vincent Price. This is one of his last performances ever. He's like a very famous actor from an era far, far removed from us.
Yeah.
Typically the guy who used to play the villains in like old monster movies and stuff like that. I'll say that I haven't seen this movie in 20 to 25 years, and I distinctly remembered Vincent Price from this movie.
I mean, how can you not, right? He's got a very cinematic face.
Yes.
And he was born to play like a mad scientist.
Exactly.
Just striking looking.
Yeah.
Apparently he was in very poor health when they shot this movie.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. So then we have the rest of the Boggs family. We have Kim, played by Winona Ryder, who is, I would say, a household name. She was absolutely one of the biggest actresses of the 1990s. She's kind of had this big resurgence with like Stranger Things and some other things in that nature. I think Winona Ryder's always great.
She was Mina Harker in the Dracula movie we just did.
Yeah. This has kind of become like a low-key Winona Ryder year as well for us.
Yeah. Hey, Winona, if you're listening, we would love to have you on.
No, like genuinely, I think she's a phenomenal performer. She kind of just has it, Like she's beautiful, but she's also like really, really strong in everything she does.
Yeah, and like she's able to play a bratty teenager without making her insufferable.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, and I actually really can't wait to talk about her performance, particularly in the deep dive as well, because I think that there's so much backstory to her as a person and what she brought to this role that I kind of got into the weeds of that because I thought that was really interesting.
Was she were her and Johnny Depp an item at this point?
Yes, they were.
Ooh.
So that also kind of played into that these two were together, and obviously like this is a bit of a romance movie as well. and at this time they were dating. I think they got married like shortly after this movie, and that was a very quick marriage.
Did they get married?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for them. I guess this was before she accidentally married Keanu Reeves.
Yes, it is.
You know what? Good for her.
Yeah. We've got their son Kevin, the father Bill Boggs, played by Alan Arkin.
Yes, it's so weird seeing him with hair.
I gotta say that I also just like really loved this performance too, and the character of Bill is one of my favorites of the movie.
Just the kind of suburban dad kind of thing.
Yeah. We'll talk about that more in the deep dive as well. You'll have seen him most recently. He did pass away last year, I think, but his last big movie was the grandfather in Little Miss Sunshine.
I never saw that.
I haven't seen it either.
He was also, if you saw the Get Smart movie,
yes,
with, what's his name? Michael Scott?
Steve Carell.
He was the like the head agent in that, and he was really, really good in that too.
Yeah,
he was also the boss in Marley and Me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he kind of has a knack for playing like hard-headed but kind-hearted like authority figures.
Yeah, he plays a detective in Gattaca as well, so he's been around. We've talked about him before, I believe.
He's also just one of those guys who like he's probably always just looked kind of old.
Yeah.
Like when he was 25, he probably looked, you know.
Yeah.
Good for him though.
Yeah. The receding hairline will do that to you.
Yeah, it sure will.
And we've got Jim, who's Kim's mean jock boyfriend, played by Anthony Michael Hall, like out of character. Anthony Michael Hall is a person that if you are a big John Hughes guy or gal, you'll know him because he's in like all of the John Hughes classics from the 80s.
I think most notably he was the nerd in The Breakfast Club.
Yes.
You know what's funny though? I feel like he's most notable for playing the nerd in The Breakfast Club, but then he plays a jock meathead in this movie. Mm-hmm. He also has a 1-episode role as a bully in the first season of Community.
Oh, he does, too.
Yeah, the Christmas episode, right? And they even made a joke about that. I think Pierce said, like, oh, he was probably a nerd and now he's a jock. Or, like, he was probably a nerd and now he's a bully. So maybe his strength was playing bullies.
I think he's really good in this as well. Like, I think he's maybe a little over the top, but that's kind of what the role was calling for, so...
I guess with this kind of, like... This movie has a very much, like, a fairy tale aesthetic.
Yes.
I feel like he's definitely the Gaston figure.
Right.
They just make him a cartoonish sociopath to the point where you wonder what attracted Winona Ryder to him in the first place.
That's a really good point, yeah.
Yeah, like it's so funny. This is jumping ahead, but there's a scene later on where, and this is a spoiler, I'm sorry, where he's just been dumped and he's drinking beer with his buddy. And he's like, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to beat him up. And his buddy's like, come on, man, don't make me drive. I've been drinking. And he's like, just do it. And even his henchman is like, man, no wonder she dumped you. like, wow, everyone hates this guy.
Yeah. The last person I just want to quickly mention is Kathy Baker playing the horniest stay-at-home mom to ever grace the screens.
The horniest. The absolute horniest, right?
The movie practically opens with her trying to
seduce a repairman. Let's put it politely. It's so funny. There's this guy, he's like fixing her dishwasher, and he's kind of implying that like he doesn't even need to be here. It's an easy fix.
Right.
And then the mom, I forget her name already, shows up.
Peg.
She's like, Peg, are you blind? Can you not see there's a car in my driveway? She's like, oh, yeah. She's like, well, I'm busy. And then she shuts the door.
Yeah, that's how the movie opens with Kathy Baker just like...
trying to put the moves on this poor, hapless delivery man. It kind of reminds me of that episode where, like, I don't know, Selma from The Simpsons is trying to, like, seduce a TV repairman. And he's just like, hey, this TV's not broken. It's just not plugged in. And then she slams the door.
Yeah, it's great. I just wanted to highlight it because I thought it was a really crazy performance. And then Tim Burton, who we've talked about already. Who is this movie for? Does it hold up to a modern watch? This is going to be a really interesting part of the discussion because I've kind of been trying to figure out who this movie is for. And that's not even to say this movie is bad. I think this movie is actually very good.
I think this movie's pretty good, too. I didn't like it as much. I don't think I liked it as much as you did, but I did like it. Mm-hmm. You know, I have, like, a goldfish attention span. And, like, what I like to describe is, like, just crackhead energy. But, like, I was able to watch this movie in one sitting. So, and that doesn't always happen for me. Just because I'm busy and I'm a crackhead who doesn't do crack.
Just a lot of coffee.
Yes.
Like an excessive amount.
Yes.
I guess where I pinned it down for me is I think where I would have enjoyed this most is watching this as like an angsty mid to late teenager.
Yeah, I feel like Tim Burton really vibes with angsty teenagers
Yeah.
who like Hot Topic, and it's kind of weird trying to get into that headspace when you're in your 30s.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say that this movie is effective at it because it brings me back a little bit to that time in my life. Like I was kind of having bad nostalgia, but I was just having like these memories of like, that struggle.
Adolescent angst.
Yeah, and like, like this movie and a lot of these young or early Tim Burton movies, they are kind of study the teenage angst and the teenage experience.
I don't know that Tim Burton ever really recovered from his teen angst, but I mean, he's made millions of dollars off it, so more power to him.
I think that why this movie resonates with people so much is because it makes people feel heard.
I have a very personal interpretation of this movie, actually. Maybe we should save it for the deep dive, but I almost feel like it's a metaphor for the artist experience. You know what I mean? We'll talk about that more in the deep dive, but that was what I came away from it with.
Do you think this movie holds up in 2024?
Honestly, yeah. I do think it drags a little in places, but especially we talked about how interesting the first and second act are.
Right.
But no, I think it holds up fairly well.
I think so as well. Again, if you're a fan of like Tim Burton's aesthetic, obviously this is going to do it for you because this is one of the most Tim Burton-esque aesthetic movies. It's what he actually bases a lot of his further works on, is kind of what he nails in this.
I think he said that like he this is maybe not his best movie, but it's his like most personal movie.
Yes, and it's definitely one of his favorites. It's also, as a side note, Danny Elfman's favorite composed score that he's done.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that in more detail, I think. This movie makes the 60s come alive in a way that not a lot of other movies that I can directly refer back to.
Is it really the 60s? I feel like this is almost just like a timeless portrait of suburbia.
Well, in a sense, yes, but I think that the aesthetic is like the 60s vibe. The reason why this kind of holds up as well for me is I like when films are about a period that has already occurred and that we've had time to reflect on. Because if you make a movie that's set in 2024 and it has kind of like whatever the 2024 vibes are to it, or like if we go back to the 50s, like when we did the Marilyn Monroe episodes, I can't remember the first Marilyn Monroe movie.
Some Like It Hot?
No, it was the other one we did. I can't remember what it was at this point, but some movies that when they take place in the time period that they're set in and it's very contemporary, I think that there's not enough time to kind of reflect on that time period, and it kind of, even though it's set in contemporary times, it also just kind of ages poorly sometimes.
I suppose, yeah. And I feel like part of the reason this movie does hold up is because there's something kind of ageless about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, I think, some of the influences of the movie as well, right? They're like timeless stories of humanity.
Yeah. And I mean, this movie, again, like I've said, it almost has like a modern fairy tale aesthetic too.
Very much so, yeah.
And even like the way the whole story is framed, it opens with Winona Ryder. Her granddaughter asks, "Why is it snowing?" And she launches into the story. So we automatically have kind of like this framing device.
Yeah.
Right? That really welcomes us into it.
I'm really glad that a movie like this exists. Even though it has like some really strong influences to it, it feels like very original in its storytelling, in the way that it's telling the story, in the way that it's presenting the story, that not a lot of filmmakers get to kind of have this level of creation and artistic flair anymore.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess part of that is Tim Burton was, I think, hot off the success of Batman, and the studio was just kind of like, do whatever you want, man.
Yeah, he definitely got a blank check on this one for sure. So my one scene to sell movie is there are 5 scenes on movie clips for this one, and it's just the first one. It's Edward frightens Kim. It's the scene where Kim finally enters the movie. Winona Ryder finally shows up like halfway through this movie almost. She happens upon poor Edward sleeping in her
bed. Her water bed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the whole scene plays out. It's so comical, but it also just like puts on display the full, like, really the depth of Johnny Depp's performance in this scene. Like,
yeah,
he's just like, he's so uncomfortable in his own skin. He's like so awkward. Like, he's terrified, like when she surprises him, right? And she starts screaming.
Yeah, this is a real paternal blunder where they should have maybe warned him,
Right.
oh, like, Kim's coming back. Maybe we should put you somewhere else. Or
Right.
like, yeah.
Yeah, and it also just kind of like the family unit is really on display here as well. Like everybody together coming out and like dealing with this situation. It also starts to touch on like Bill and Edward starting to drink down in the basement. It kind
The
of cuts
lemonade,
off.
yeah.
Yes, it cuts off partway through that. That's where the scene kind of ends on movie clips, but it's very, very good and it's very funny, but also like, you know, your heart goes out for the poor guy, but your heart also goes out for poor Kim, who's just like stumbled upon.
Yeah, I mean, by this point in the movie, we love Edward, but let us not forget, he is a goth with scissors for hands,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, sleeping like in this poor like teenage girl's bed.
Yeah.
Like, I think that scene also, it just reminds you of some of the absurdity of everything that's happened for the first 40 minutes as well.
Yeah, I would pick the same scene simply because it's when Kim and Ed finally meet each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes about as poorly as you might imagine.
Yeah, it's great. I really love that scene a lot. It was the obvious choice for me. So when to watch? And here's where maybe we have our first part of the Christmas movie discussion. I'll just open it to you right now. Is this a Christmas movie?
No, it's not. I'm sorry, it's not. Christmas takes place in the movie, but it's such a small part of the overall story. You know what I mean?
Right.
Part of it is this whole movie is a story that a now elderly Kim is telling her daughter about why it snows, right?
Right.
It's almost framed as like a what's that word? Like an
I have no idea what you're talking about.
It's almost framed as like an epistemological myth. I don't know if I'm saying that word correctly. It's,
Okay.
you know,
You're gonna
like,
have to explore it or explain it more for the dumbs like me.
no, it's just like a myth that explains why certain things are the way they are, right? Like why there's a sun, why it snows, why
I see.
it thunders, right?
Okay.
So, you know, I remember when we did Die Hard, and I remember someone saying that like Die Hard is a Christmas movie because it's all about this familial reconciliation between John McClane and his wife.
Right.
And we don't really, I don't know that we really get that in this movie.
I agree, and I'm a big champion of Die Hard being a Christmas movie,
Right.
but I also agree that I don't think this is a Christmas movie either. And yes, the third act does take place around the holidays. There's the opener, which is like this grandmother telling her daughter the story about why it snows. It's like, I think that you're more likely to watch it around the holidays, but you could just as easily watch this one on January 30th as you could December 25th or 24th.
You could watch it June 17th. You can watch it
Yes.
whenever you want.
Yeah, I actually think that this falls into a category of something like Eyes Wide Shut, where yes, it takes place around the holidays, but that's more of a visual and use of like an other narrative reason or purpose for kind of having this movie take place around this period than it is
Yeah.
about Christmas and what Christmas is about for people.
If I wrote like 100,000 word novel and 5,000 words took place on the holidays, I would not then call it a Christmas book.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
It's similar to, I've seen the argument that the Lord of the Rings trilogy is a Christmas movie. The reason for that is because technically speaking, Frodo leaves the Shire on December 25th.
What?
Yes.
Okay.
But-
There is a December in Middle Earth?
Yes. And I will say as well that I am highly likely to watch the Lord of the Rings series every year over the Christmas holidays because it just provides me that kind of time to watch that series. And also, it feels good watching it between December 25th and the 31st because I think that the Lord of the Rings, if anything, is more of a New Year's kind of movie than it is a Christmas movie. But I would never call the Lord of the Rings series a Christmas series.
No. You know, this is an audio-only podcast, but when Blake started off on that tangent, I gave him the funniest look. Yeah. So no, I don't think it's a Christmas movie.
I agree. A lot of people recognize it as such, and I think that if the holidays give you a good excuse to come back and revisit this one, if you really love it, then that's great. I think that, you know, some movies are going to just kind of have that connotation around a certain period of time, but that doesn't inherently make it a Christmas movie.
You heard it here first, folks. Edward Scissorhands, not a Christmas movie.
Maybe a controversial take, but
At me in the comments.
yeah. Where to watch? So right now you've got a few options for this one, which is nice because that's not always the case with some of the movies that we watch. But you can check this one out on Disney Plus or Crave, or if you have Stars through Crave or Prime, then you could check it out through there. So I watched this one on Crave, and it was great.
Okay. I rented it on YouTube because I didn't have anywhere else to watch it, and it looks really good on YouTube.
Good. And I think that's it for the primer episode. So I'm looking forward to talking about this one because it is definitely an enigma of a movie. I'm really interested to pick your brain on this one because I
have opinions.
I thought you might.
I often do.
Okay, so we'll see you next time. As always, tell your dad.
Tell your dad. Well, actually, tell your sister.
Yeah.
This is a movie your sister would really like.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
This one's for the ladies out there.
For the ladies. All right, bye.